Forces loyal to Saudi Arabia and those backed by the UAE have been fighting in Aden. That's a significant turn in the country's war. So, what does it all mean? And how might it affect the conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The war in Yemen looks like it's taking another drastic turn, one that could change the makeup of the country as we know it today and shape how it functions in the future. In a complicated turn of events, and despite being part of the same coalition fighting Houthi rebels, forces loyal to the United Arab Emirates and those loyal to Saudi Arabia appear to have turned on each other. Fighting has been going on for days, killing dozens, as a battle for control of the southern city of Aden intensifies. The UAE-backed Southern Transitional Council wants the Yemeni government out, and that's got the United Nations concerned. Caught in the middle, as usual, are civilians, as Andrew Chappelle reports.
As some residents of Aden remain trapped in their homes to try and stay away from street battles, they're finding little protection. At least 4 people were killed when Southern separatists shelled this residential area north of the city in a day of fighting with the Presidential Guard. The UAE-backed separatists and the Saudi-backed government troops are believed to be targeting each other with heavy weapons in a power play for the city. The UN Secretary General is calling on the parties to engage in an inclusive dialogue to resolve their differences and address the legitimate concerns of all Yemenis. And he says the conflict in Yemen can only be resolved through a political solution. On Friday, the commander of the Presidential Guard, Brigadier General Sanad al-Rahwa, was filmed visiting the city center, as was Hani bin Break, the deputy chairman of the Southern Transitional Council, who visited wounded troops in hospital. Hani bin Break has become a central figure in the rebellion. On August 1st, the Houthis attacked a military parade in Aden, killing scores of new recruits. Munir al-Yafei, seen here shortly before his death, was a top commander of the Security Belt, a UAE-trained paramilitary force. At his funeral, there was an exchange of fire between the STC-aligned fighters and the Presidential Guards. Hani bin Break then accused Hadi's forces of playing a role in the attack, and on Wednesday called on Southern separatists to march on the presidential palace and topple the internationally recognized government of President Abdurabu Mansur Hadi. He and the Security Belt forces are supported by the UAE, which announced its withdrawal from Yemen last month. Hadi's government has accused him of fomenting sedition, saying this will only serve the Houthis. They remain in control of the capital Sana'a, despite more than 4 years of war by the Saudi-UAE coalition. Residents there received some good news on Friday. The World Food Programme has reached a deal with the Houthis to resume food aid next week.
WFP said it will resume food distribution following the Eid al-Adha festival for the 850,000 people in Sana'a city who have not received food rations from WFP for the last 2 months.
The past few days have raised fears that Yemen's war may be evolving into something even more complicated, with rival factions vying to control its future. Andrew Chappelle, Al Jazeera.
The Southern Transitional Council mentioned in that report is something we're likely to be hearing a lot more about as the situation in Yemen changes. The STC was formed 2 years ago and is loyal to and supported by the United Arab Emirates. Its president is Idrous al-Zubaydi. It receives financing and training from the UAE and says it rules much of the southern territory of Yemen. The STC has been fighting to force out the government of President Abdurabu Mansur Hadi and is believed to be pushing for the separation of southern Yemen from the rest of the country. All right, let's bring in our guests. From Gothenburg via Skype, Afrah Nasser is chief editor of Sana'a Review. From Bristol, Osama al-Rouhani is deputy executive director of the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies. From Ottawa via Skype, Rasha Jarhoum is director of Peace Track Initiative. Welcome to the show. Afrah, let me start with you. The war in Yemen is so complicated and so fractious. Now you have forces that are loyal to President Hadi and backed by Saudi Arabia. in effect fighting separatist forces that are backed by the UAE. So does this mean that Saudi Arabia and the UAE are essentially at war with each other in southern Yemen?
Well, honestly, I wasn't surprised about the latest fighting in Aden. The demands for independence have been going on since the civil war in 1984. But today, absolutely, you're right. There is the Saudi and UAE factor in what's going on in the fighting. But for me, I don't see that they're in diverging tracks. I think they are have different plans and different interests in the war. Unfortunately, it's not a clear. They're not being transparent with their purpose in this war. They say that they are going after the Houthis, but in fact, there are a lot of economic and political and security interests for both parties, and there seems to be unspoken agreement between the UAE and Saudi, in which the UAE is taking control of south of Yemen, while the Saudis are taking control of Shabwa, which is still under dispute because of there is a lot of power struggle between the Shabwani people and the Saudi Arabia. But the longer the war goes on, the more complicated it is, and the more different interests these warring parties will have in Yemen.
Russia, as we mentioned before, it's very difficult reporting on the nuances of the multiple conflicts that are ongoing in Yemen. Could you help explain to our viewers specifically what the difference is between the Southern Transitional Council and this group or this militia known as the Security Belt?
They are loyal. It's not a militia. It's an official faction, a security faction that's by the order of Hadi president are under the Interior Ministry. But the division is among those factions within Aden who have an agenda that is, as Afrah said, reclaiming the South State, and those who have the project for a united federal Yemen. As she said as well, this was not unexpected. We've seen already same conflict dynamics that happened last year in January, where the presidential palace was surrounded, and there is this increased calls for, because they are the de facto controlling the South, and they feel like they've been excluded from the peace processes. They've been calling to be included in the peace process to discuss the South issue specifically. However, their calls have been ignored. We as women, we have also conveyed these calls to this Security Council. We have warned that the South, not addressing the South issue is a ticking bomb. And what we have been seeing in the last 3 days is exactly what we've been warning from. And the reaction of the international community is always reactive, not proactive, to prevent blood and conflict, instead of engaging with them peacefully to discuss their demands. They are pushing them towards this kind of behavior, which is more violent. Now, generally, in terms of Saudi Arabia and UAE, I think there is not conflict, but maybe a different set of priorities. The Saudis are more, they see that they need to first support the government of Yemen to end the coup, which is happening in Sana'a by the Houthis. And this is also what the government have been conveying to us in terms of excluding the Southerners at this stage. When we called for their inclusion, they have always told us that it's not time to include women or any third parties, basically implying the Southerners, because they want to keep the discussion in terms of the peace process to be limited to basically a co-discussion. That's what's happening in the north, ignoring the old grievances and what is happening in the south.
Osama, I'm sure you heard Russia as well as Afrah talk about the fact that neither of them is surprised by what's going on, that the signs were always there. But I'd also like you to address the fact that when it comes to Aden, when it comes to the south, the separatist movement is something that's gone on for quite a long time now, correct?
Yes, it is. Actually, what happens in Aden today represents, or is going to represent a radical change in the Yemen's conflict. It's adding different layers of complexity, and it is very obvious of how, starting from the coalition's position towards what happens in Aden, reflects the unclear intentions of Saudi interventions in Yemen. It's not really clear how do they want to regain the legitimacy of the Yemeni government while they are supporting the attack against the internationally recognized government. Now, the government, which the Saudi claims to help regain its legitimacy, has no capital. Aden was the temporary capital, is no longer exists now. It's under the control of the STC. There are other factions that are actually not under the control of the internationally recognized government, or actually they're symbolically affiliated to the internationally recognized government, but there is not much influence over them. Now we could see that Yemen, or the coalition, has managed to divide Yemen, or to divide the camp that they are supporting. Now we have the STC in the south, and not only the STC, we have other southerner groups that we have no idea so far how the STC intends to include them. It's either to include them or exclude them. That would go back to the STC. But what we could see now is that the STC is the upper hand, and I think the question is, among a lot of other unanswered questions, is will they go ahead with their separation agenda, or will they go with doing a dialogue with the internationally recognized government and make sure that they're included in the peace process? This is one of the questions that hasn't been answered. But also, if we look at the other sides, we have the Brotherhood, and it's still a very contentious issue. And it's a main issue of conflict between Saudi and UAE. Although with the support, or with the Saudi giving a green light for STC to take over Aden, I don't see there's much of conflict between UAE and Saudi. There's a lot that we can predict. It's really complicated, but there needs to be a clarity on what is next. Now the STC has taken over Aden. Who is going to run the country? The government is now in exile. The state institutions are actually based in Aden. There has been a lot of shift from after the Houthi coup from Sana'a to Aden. The question is now who's going to run these institutions, who's going to provide basic services, who's going to pay the salaries of civil servants. The internationally recognized government, to some extent, has managed in the last few months to provide these services, or at least we have seen some sort of improvement. The question is now, will the STC be up to the challenge of taking this responsibility? This is one of the questions unanswered, and we cannot predict.
Osama, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just that I see Afrah nodding along, so I want to get your response because it looks like you want to jump in. But I also want to ask you, you've heard what Osama is saying. Do you believe that the Southern Transitional Council has the capability to take Aden?
Well, I've done recently a lot of interviews with women politicians inside the South, and they told me that there are about 25 political groups seeking and demanding independence. So it's not only STC that is, the only representative of the Southern movement, but there are other groups, and that also adds to the complication of the conflict. But for me, I honestly don't. I wouldn't be surprised if secession happened in the near future, because in my opinion, the country is divided already. So if you look at the security apparatus between the South and the North, it's totally different. I have some relatives in the South and relatives in the North. They are unable to use some of the local Riyal Yemeni in the different parts because of the separation of the Yemeni central bank. So you cannot use the money produced in the south in the north, and vice versa. So for me, the country is already divided, and this emphasizes on the fact that we need to address Yemen from a local perspective and before going to the international perspective. I think there is a huge emphasis on the international dynamics, which really distract us from the real problems on the ground. And I should applaud this panel in specific, where you have all Yemeni guest speakers, and that really, for me, is where I see there is a need to listen to Yemenis from their own perspectives and not ignore. There is a word being repeated over and over. The war is being ignored. Yemeni voices are being ignored. The southern voices are women are being ignored. The dismissing of these factions is very, very problematic, and it's one of the things that led us to where we are today.
Rasha, the UAE announced in July that they were going to be drawing down their forces in Yemen, but there's been a lot of conflicting reporting about what exactly that means. What do you understand that means? Are they actually just rebasing forces? Are they withdrawing completely? Will they still have troops in the south? From your perspective, what's going to happen when it comes to the UAE presence in Yemen?
My understanding is that they are doing redeployment and focusing on, I think, because of all the escalations that happened with Iran in the region. So they are doing redeployment and gradually are being removed, at least the ground troops from Yemen. On the other hand, we heard reports that Saudi Arabia is sending troops into the country. We heard about at least 2 batches of military troops going in, unconfirmed report, but we can see all these kind of dynamics happening. My guess is that Saudi Arabia and UAE in this conflict in the last 3 days did not really interfere militarily to stop one or the other. It was Yemeni or South fighting, and they did not interfere. They were more focused on a mediation process. And I can understand why is that. It's basically Saudi Arabia cannot continue to be intervening in Yemen without the legitimacy of Hadi. At the same time, they cannot go and fight against the STC, who are the ones who are doing the actual fight against the Houthis, or at least the loyal military troops are doing the fight against the Houthis.
Rasha,
so this was a very...
Rasha, I'm sorry to interrupt, but by that, do you mean that you believe that the Saudis don't have the military capability to take on that group?
I don't think they want to go into another yet round of conflict with any more Yemeni troops, one way or another. I think the Saudis and the UAE, their messaging, whenever we speak to them and their diplomats, have been that 2019 is going to be more into a political solution in Yemen. And they wanted to reduce the military presence. This is what the signs they have been sharing with us. So I don't think if they are going there, it's basically to hold a position, to secure a location, but not really to engage. At least this is my own interpretation of the conflict. And what I can see is that maybe, or this is my own interpretation, is that after securing the south and stabilizing it, they would do the same in north, at least in Hodeidah, where they would not interfere, but they will the local actors will lead the fight without interference from Saudis or UAE.
I see. Osama, we've been expecting to hear in the last couple of days from Yemen's president, Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi. That has not happened. What do you think that means?
First, before talking about Hadi's usual or the always-on presence in such kind of situations, it's really important to highlight that what happens in Aden and in other parts of the country is always, or the upper hand on it when it comes to decision making, is the coalitions. And although there was not Saudi troops intervening yesterday or the 2 days past, it's actually under their green light. They could stop the war, they could have it continue. They managed for a few hours to stop the battle, and then the battle resumed, and that would raise a lot of questions of why did Saudi shift its position? When it comes to Hadi, and this goes back again to the same idea, is does Hadi have the leadership capabilities to talk to the people? At least we have expected them after the new news or STC taking over Aden, at least we'd like him to speak to the people, see what is happening, at least share with us what does that mean. He did that when Houthis took over Amran in the past, and he went to Amran and he said Amran is now belonging to the states and it's under my control. He hasn't done this this time. I don't know, maybe he lacks the confidence that he wouldn't be able to control Aden any longer. Maybe the coalition is restricting him, but that is not something new from Hadi. Maybe the question now is, if the coalition is supporting Hadi to fight Houthis, on what ground would they fight Houthis now? And I think that is a very important question. How is the fight against Houthis dynamic will change now? Will there be one unified leadership fighting Houthis? Will even the STC now, being in the south, have the priority to support that agenda? We find through the discourse of the STC in the last few days, they've been claiming that they are still under the internationally recognized president's legitimacy and they're going to be supporting that. But it doesn't seem like that on the ground, given the fact that they were fighting the troops that are under the control of Hadis. Not only this, they have also defeated them. So the question is now, what is the coalition's goal in fighting Houthis? Now, I think this is the most crucial thing. If the coalition's intervention in Yemen is to defeat Houthis and regain the legitimacy, we could see that what the coalition is going the other directions. They're not supporting the legitimacy. They're not actually making any progresses against Houthis. Rather, they're making more fragmentations within their camp.
Afrah, I want to turn attention for a moment to the continuing humanitarian catastrophe that has been going on in Yemen for so long now. Obviously, now you have what is essentially a war within a war. That's what's happening in the south. Now, I used to report from Yemen a lot, and even in 2010, 2011, you already had skyrocketing malnutrition figures. You already had a dire humanitarian crisis even before this conflict. Right now, with what's going on in Aden, you have civilians that are trapped in the crossfire. How bad is the situation there, and how bad is the situation on the humanitarian scale in the rest of the country?
It's not an exaggeration that the United Nations say that what's going on in Yemen or the humanitarian situation is the worst and largest humanitarian catastrophe that the United Nations faced since it was established following the Second World War. So by 2020, if the situation did not improve, we will have about 30 million people almost in famine. So that gives you an idea of, I think this is the largest victimhood of a population after the Holocaust. It will be, it's like hell in life for millions of Yemenis. Even as we speak today in Aden, there are many reports about some neighborhoods lacking water. Fuel, the city is running out of fuel, so that means the transportation will be expensive and food prices will skyrocket. So it's very, very important to find some sort of solution to mitigate the humanitarian situation. I cannot describe to you what could happen for a population that at the same time is increasing and facing all these humanitarian difficulties. A lot of civilians are paying heavy price for these political disputes.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all our guests, Afrah Nasser, Osama Rouhani, and Rasha Jarhoum. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website.